Welcome to the Nunn Report, bringing your regular dose of truth, freedom, and weirdness. With your host, Dan Nunn.
Thank you for tuning in today as we close out this week. You know, I'm going to ask some questions today. A big part of the show is going to be dedicated to this, and that is, who is Vivek Ramaswamy? And more part of that is there a Soros connection? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. And I'm going to explain that. So stay with the show, please. I'm going to talk to you about the so-called Soros connection, the reality of it, and also the disinformation portion of it that people are buying into. And they're discounting this person simply because, oh, he takes Soros money. No. And I'll explain as we go through the show. We're going to take a look at some of his policy ideas, some of the things he's come up with lately. As he's gained attention, I admit that I wasn't really, he's kind of on the peripheral. He wasn't really right in my wheelhouse. I wasn't watching him really close. But as I've discovered more about him and researched more about him, as he's climbed in the polls, I've started to pay more attention. That's what happens. That's the natural course of an election. And he's turning some heads, and he raises some good points. He's a smart, bright, articulate man. He's certainly no slouch. He's a successful scholar. He's a successful entrepreneur, and he has some really good ideas. He has a lot of energy. Don't discount him, okay? And don't buy into the Soros misinformation. I'm going to provide the receipts, and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. We're going to take a look at the legal troubles of both the Bidens and Trump, because they've all got them. It seems like anybody who's president nowadays has legal troubles, although we know that one is real, the Biden crime family. And what's interesting is it's like the more that gets exposed and revealed about the Biden crime family, the more they pile on Trump. In fact, Atlanta now is getting ready to dump some charges on him as well. And so we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at current poll numbers of the elections and where they're at, and maybe a couple of other things, maybe a little bit of weirdness here and there. So let's get things kicked off here quickly. It's Friday. I'm looking forward to the weekend. I hope you are too. I hope you got some good plans, whether it's with your family, with your dogs, with everything, travel. I hope you don't have to work, people. I mean, really, go out and enjoy yourself, do some self-care, that sort of thing, especially if it involves family or dogs. Those are my two favorite things. Anyway, let's get this kicked off. He's recently done a lot of interviews as he's become and risen in the polls and whatnot. Of course, he's getting more interviews from larger platforms. He's getting longer segments and more voice. He has some great plans to eliminate parts of the federal government. We're going to talk about that. And so Vivek Ramaswamy, who is he? And is there a Soros connection? That's today's episode. We're going to start with a couple with Jesse Waters, had him on, and there's a part one and part two. I'm going to play them both with a little bit of commentary in between so we can kind of dissect and unpack what he talks about and some of the policies that he wants to put in place and that he promotes. Then we'll take a look at a couple of other things, and we'll hear from the man himself on the so-called World Economic Forum connection, which there is not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to explain all that. We're going to explain the connection to the Soros. So stick with me there. But first, let's get a little bit of information on the man himself, starting right here.
Vivek, why do the Democrats now want to censor RFK Jr.?
Well, as somebody who is competing with RFK in some way in this election process, and as somebody who has my own disagreements with him on issues ranging from climate policy to affirmative action, I applaud his willingness to speak truths that the Democratic Party, his own party, does not want to hear. They prefer compliant puppets of the managerial class, like Joe Biden, like John Fetterman, as you noted, to somebody who's actually going to challenge their orthodoxy. And the funny thing, Jesse, is that the left used to be the movement in this country that stood for free speech, but things have changed in the last couple of decades. Now it appears to be more of a conservative value. And so even though I disagree with RFK on a number of policies, I did call him yesterday. I told him to keep up and stay strong in his fight. I respect his willingness to speak hard truths. That's what I'm doing in the Republican primary as well. And I think our country is going to be at its best when both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the best versions of themselves, each pushing each other up, leveling up. That's what competition is supposed to do.
Yeah, but they don't want competition.
The managerial class of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, so leveling up, I agree. And one of the things that he brought up was the fact that the Democrat and Republican Party, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to use, have swapped places. They really have. It's funny. I get a lot of trolls, obviously, on my site. And the larger it's gotten, the more trolls I get, and they become, I try to, usually I just block them because eventually they're going to turn on you and try to report you. And if you get enough reports, your page could get taken down, whether that's on Twitter or Facebook. So I don't even mess with them. Once in a while, I'll keep them around if they're a little bit entertaining. But what's funny is the number of old white men with long hair that look like they're leftovers from the 60s. And I always ask them, you look like the kind of person that used to be anti-establishment. What happened? What happened? Because these same people who used to protest in the 60s and protest government and war and all that thing are now all in favor of war and big government. So they love big government. They love war, all the things that they used to protest against in their youth. And it's led this country down a hole, a slide into the pits of, really close to the pits of hell, I think. And the closer we've gotten to hell, the more evil and demonic activity you see in this country. But Vivek brings up a lot of good points there where, look, we need competition. We need to inspire each other. And in an ideal world, yes. But he understands the realities of the fact that the Democratic Party simply is in lockstep and they do not want to compromise. They don't want to lift each other up. They don't want to lift America up or Americans. The only people they want to lift up are themselves. And the second segment talks about that. So the first one, he says, look, the parties need to work together. We need to lift each other up and whatnot. And here's part two. Check it out.
There's a study that COVID was bioengineered. So what? I mean, you can call that BS. You can call it, let's look into it, or you could call it what? So what? What are they afraid of?
The real question, they're afraid of the truth, actually, because the path to truth runs through free speech and open debate. We would not have locked down those schools if you had been allowed to say on the internet that we should not lock down those schools. We wouldn't have locked down the schools in the way we did. We would have known that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan if you had been allowed to say on the internet or elsewhere that it originated in a lab in Wuhan.
So, Vivek, are they embarrassed? Are they embarrassed that they botched the response to COVID, or is there a financial factor?
I think it's more than just the retrospective embarrassment, though I do think that's part of it. It's the fact that they want to hide from the truth in the present. And I think they want to have the option, Jesse, of saying that if this is the new order, if suppressing misinformation becomes a new progressive virtue, then the next time there's an emergency or so-called emergency circumstance, they can still pull that card to advance their political agenda.
So it's about power.
So in a certain way, it's preserving the options.
So it's
about
preserving the
preserving
power
the
play.
option.
Okay. Because the next thing that happens, they suppress speech all over again because now there's press.
So he recognizes that it's a power trip, a power play on the Democrats' part, that the whole response to COVID did not have to do with saving lives, didn't have to do with protecting people, didn't have to do with flattening the curve. It had to do with cementing power and creating a mechanism whereby they could declare a state of emergency. And because it's an emergency, they can do almost anything they want. They can totally suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They can censor your speech. They can censor the information you can say. They censor the information you receive. And the only thing you get to hear is the government line while they line their pockets and the pharmaceuticals get wealthy. He gets that. And I'm glad he's not afraid to say so. And he understands its power. So he, perfect republic, yes, the parties would work together to lift each other up and thereby lifting America up. But unfortunately, that's not what we have right now. I think Vivek gets it. And the more I look at this guy, the more I think about, he really is a constitutional conservative. And he's a huge believer in the Bill of Rights. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later when we talk about the so-called Soros connection. But just recently, in fact, I think this was just this morning, he was on Timcast with Tim Pool. And I grabbed this. His parents were immigrants. They came here in, when did they come here? Man. Anyway, they came to Cincinnati. They're from India. He was born in Cincinnati, and his parents immigrated here. He was born there. As an immigrant, he was able to get some funds through a trust, which we're going to discuss as well. So he went to school. He went to graduate school. He's a biology guy. He has a law degree. He has all the credentials. He did a business startup where he built it into a large tech company and then sold it out. That's where his fortune came from. Okay. So this guy is an entrepreneur. He is a scholar and he's a visionary. Does he have what it takes to be president? Before we go any close, no, I have not jumped off the Trump train. Dan is still 100% behind Donald J. Trump. He's the man that we need right now. But imagine this guy. He's already starting to pass DeSantis in some polls. And DeSantis is so dry, man. There's no way he's going past the primaries. I think that Vivek could potentially become, well, maybe not a vice president. I think a more important role than that would be a upper position in the administration. And because the vice president, let's face it. I mean, the vice president gets sent around the world to do things that nobody else wants to do. And they're really just kind of a placeholder where there are some cabinet member positions that wield far more influence, far more power, have far more input than the vice president ever would. So anyway, here's Vivek. He was on Timcast. Check this out. And I show you all these videos so that I can talk about him and I can tell you about him, but I don't know how much you have dug into him. And so I'm showing all these clips. They're longish clips, anywhere from 1 minute to 1 minute, 30 seconds. But I show them to you so that you can kind of make up your own mind. So you can listen to him speak. If you haven't searched him out, if you haven't looked at some of what he has to say, and there is a lot of it out there now, I highly recommend you do. Do your homework on this fellow because you might be surprised.
Hardship is not a choice in life. Right? Hardship is something that happens to you. My parents actually encountered plenty of it as we were growing up. My dad faced I think a ruthless round of layoffs at GE under Jack Welch's tenure when my dad was, 10 steps down the totem pole in their org chart. But what did he do? He went to night school at law school for 4 years. I was in 6th grade. I used to go with him and sit with him in the back of the classroom because we didn't have childcare or anything else. Full day at work, 45-minute drive to northern Kentucky, but he kept his job that way because they had a shortage of patent attorneys. I say this because I grew up in a household where that was the example that was set for me. So when I entered the workforce, 2008 financial crisis hit 6 months into my job. We had some problems. Mm-hmm. But I remember the example my parents set. Hardship is something that happens to you. It's not something you choose.
Yes.
But victimhood is a choice.
Yeah.
We choose to be victims. You don't choose your hardship, but you do choose victimhood. You can choose not to be a victim. And hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. And I share that because there are legitimate grievances that many millennials and Gen Z members growing up in our American economy can have. But honestly, for most of human history, most people of any skin color or whatever, we all have some grievance we can latch onto. But I think a big part of where we landed in this case of self-loathing was this deeper psychic insecurity that we're actually afraid of trying to realize our full potential because if we fail, we're afraid of that failure. We're afraid to match up to the standard set by the great man, our baby boomer generation that came before.
Yeah, hardship versus victimhood. And I would add on to that a lot of the victimhood mentality comes from our leaders in Washington, D.C., our politicians who constantly put victimhood on you because of your race, because of your class, because of your financial standing, because of your immigrant status, because of where you came from, because of who your parents are, because they always, the commie Democrats always have a reason to make somebody a victim. They don't want people to succeed. You understand that, right? The Democrats do not want you to succeed because that threatens them. It threatens their control and their power because if you don't need them to survive, then what's their purpose? Oh, they might actually have to be servants instead of rulers. Wouldn't that be horrible? If our leaders actually became servants that they were meant to be, that our Constitution and the founders of this country set up the framework to be. Imagine that. Maybe we need some fresh blood and some fresh ideas and some youth and vigor. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy is the guy. Maybe not right now, but maybe in the future. He was also at Turning Point Action Conference, and he had this to say.